But first, let me just tell you quickly what those 4 scripts that Nathanson found and called the compass of shame are. When someone has that moment of shame and humiliation in their life, what the natural kind of response to do is to have that moment of interruption. And at that point, nobody thinks really very clearly. You know, if Leroy is out on the golf course and he hits the ball off into the woods, and it was a real important shot because our foursome wasn't doing very well, he might do a number of things at that moment. He might feel some embarrassment. He might feel a little shame, humiliation. And what would he do with that? Well, he might just say, well, that was embarrassing. I feel really embarrassed about that. And we might then be able to say, well, you'll do better next time. But yes, that was embarrassing. We could acknowledge those moments when we feel embarrassment. But mostly that's not what we do. What a lot of people do is when they have a moment of embarrassment, they will withdraw. That's the first of the 4. Now what that looks like is a student in class who raises his hand, he has the wrong answer. And so he doesn't raise his hand again. Right? I just withdraw to avoid any more embarrassment. We all do that, don't we? It's one of the scripts that we learn to deal with shame and humiliation. Now, on the low end, that doesn't cause a whole lot of problems. But what happens if over and over and over again in my life I experience some shame, humiliation, and what happens is I withdraw, and I withdraw, and I withdraw. Eventually what happens is I find myself finding myself more and more withdrawn, and it begins to look like something you could call clinical depression. People unable to leave their house for fear of that moment of shame, humiliation. And what happens to the kid when instead of just not raising his hand anymore, he decides not to go to class the next day? He skips class. He might not even realize that what he's doing is a withdrawal script. And then someone's going to call him up. They're going to say, what happened? How come you weren't at school today? Or maybe he gets in trouble for not being at school. Now there's more shame, humiliation. And what will he do? Perhaps, if this is his script, he will withdraw further. What we've learned about shame, humiliation as a biological program within us is that when we are scripting to avoid that feeling, instead of just allowing it to be what it is, a message that something that we wanted has been interrupted, something we wished for has been impeded, something that we didn't want exposed has been exposed. Instead of just taking in that information and learning from it and moving on, when we use these scripts, we often get into patterns that keep more and more shame being created in our life, and therefore more and more need for the script, and therefore more stuck energy in our lives. We get into a stuck place. Can't you see, perhaps, that just that one script of withdrawal could be a way to understand a lot of what happens for children in our school system, that unable to manage because our school systems really are not set up to help manage the emotional experience of children. And most families are unable to really recognize too much of the dynamics of shame. In fact, shame is one of the affects, the biological parts of our emotions that we often deny the most in its existence. But schools, unable to deal with this, often exacerbate the problem out of ignorance. So what happens often in these scripts is they become stuck patterns for students. And withdrawal, withdrawal, withdrawal continues. And we wonder why it is that we're not graduating more people from our schools. The second script that Nathanson has found that people do as a way of managing their shame, humiliation, is what he calls attack self. Now, this is what I do on the golf course. When I hit the golf ball off in the woods, the first thing I'm going to say is, oh, I should give up this game. I'm just no good at it. And what Leroy will immediately say to me is, oh, you just hang in there. You're doing just fine. That's one way to deal with those moments of humiliation. And we all do little self-deprecating comments, don't we, from time to time. We kind of like it when people do that. We see them as kind of humble when they do that. One of the problems, though, is though that might work in the short run, for me to manage that moment of embarrassment on the golf course, in the long run, if I make that a regular choice, what have I done? My self-deprecating comment has allowed me to somehow slip out of the little moment of embarrassment that might have otherwise caused me to think a little bit more about how I swing the golf club. Or perhaps lead me to think, I should go to the driving range before I do this again. Not that I take golf all that seriously. The point being, however, that what I have done in a self-attack, an attack self-script, is I've somehow managed to escape the information that would tell me to go get better at that. And people will do attack self-scripts over lots of things. I'm no good at relationships. Oh, I'm just no good with money. Attacking the self often gets other people to kind of encourage and say, no, it's okay. That's helpful. We've now managed the shame. We've been able to, I guess if we say we know that we messed up, other people are going to let us off the hook. So we've managed how much of this we have to experience, but what it often does is it short circuits what I need to learn. So after I hit the ball off into the woods, did I go out to the driving range the next week? No, not if I kind of got let off the hook. So what would it be like if I got stuck in that script? Well, what happens for some people is they become so adept at attacking self that they find themselves never improving, never challenging, never moving, never becoming the things that they could become. And instead, usually attaching themselves to someone else who's a high accomplisher, who wants to have someone else around. And they often find themselves in kind of masochistic relationships. I'm not trying anymore when I'm in the attack self script. When I've become so full of that script, I simply am like a boxer who's decided to take a dive in life. That's one of the scripts that you'll find in the schoolhouse. The third script, and I want to tell you all four of these, and then I'll invite your questions. The third script that Nathanson has found is called the avoidance script. Everybody knows this script too. What happens is a moment of embarrassment leads to a need to just totally deny the experience of the feeling. And I want to go find some way to do that. So what I will do is I might go use some substance or anything that can distract me, some new stimulus that I can do to distract me from those feelings. And so alcohol, cocaine, some other street drugs often serve very well to diminish the experience of shame and create another sense of sensation for me to stay focused. It's as if the spotlight that shame is trying to point at something in my life needs to be eluded so badly that I want this light to shine somewhere else. Like the teenager who, or let's say college student, whose girlfriend he just discovers he just noticed that she was kind of attracted to his best friend. And he feels this moment of embarrassment, such great disappointment and humiliation. And what does he do? Does he in that moment recognize this is a humiliating moment? I feel humiliated. Take that information in, that what he wanted has been impeded. But then take on that journey of working through that shame rather than avoid it. And begin to recognize what he needs to do to move forward in his life. Or will he withdraw, attack self, or avoid, perhaps going over to a friend and having a drink, maybe going to a bar? Bars are often, I used to play music for a living. I played in a lot of bars. Bars are often full of people who are looking for a way to avoid experiences of different feelings, shame being one of them. I can drink away my feelings. Avoidance. Now, what's interesting about when I use the avoidance script to deal with my shame is, like the other scripts, it will often lead to creating more shame. What happens when I go and drink or snort cocaine? I'm probably, likely, because the whole experience of shame has kind of been turned off, I am likely to do that in some kind of shameless way. And so rather than having one drink or two drinks, I'm likely, having shame all turned off, to have more and find myself doing more things that create shame in my life. And then what? What will I do with that shame? Well, I'll probably use the same script again. And you can see how easily people, through the avoidance of these experiences of shame, can become what we would call addicted. The avoidance scripts that people use to deal with their shame and humiliation can become traps that create more and more shame, and people can end up having their whole life consumed by that script.